I want to take some time to do exactly what Mark was talking about and make a space to connect with one another. This week, uh, our little small family was talking about how we were feeling and how we were doing. And I think I've mentioned before that one of the terms that has come about in the midst of the last couple of years is heart tired. It's not necessarily physically tired or even sleepy, like ready to go to bed, but just weary, worn out. And this week, one of us said, kind of riffing on that, they were soul tired. I was like, is that even more tired than heart tired? I don't know. But there's been a lot of emotions welling up over the last several weeks with the start of school and some family members and friends getting sick, and even some joy at recoveries and starting new things, being excited. But I thought we would take a few moments just to talk about how have you been feeling lately, and feel free to make up descriptions if that's helpful. Thank you all for sharing. There are some weeks when I know exactly what I'm going to talk about on Sunday, very early in the week, and this was one of those weeks. I think that um, when we talk about uh, all the feelings we've been feeling lately and how we can love the people around us every day, it's kind of exhausting to think about doing that when things like I'm feeling a lot, or I'm weary, or I'm soul tired, when those are our descriptions, even in the midst of being grateful and considering ourselves lucky, it can be difficult to figure out how to love the people around us. So I appreciate you all sharing um, kind of the idea that's come to mind about how we can do this in the midst of feeling a lot or feeling weary is the idea of being open-hearted. And it's a very in the best of times, it's kind of a scary thing to open your heart and to be honest with the people around you about what's going on in your life. It's especially true when we're all going through a difficult time or difficult times, because not all of them are the same. And so the word that I've kind of pinned on this that I knew I wanted to talk about, it's actually a reflection of what Mark was talking about earlier. Maybe some ways to flesh that out, to being connected to one another. But what I'd like to talk about this week is vulnerability. That vulnerability is a way that we can love the people around us. Not, I don't want anybody to get the idea that I'm talking about taking abuse or letting people walk all over you. It's a very different kind of thing. When I looked this up to see what the Bible had to say, just like Mark was saying, vulnerability looks very specific and helps us love the people around us in some pretty specific ways. The first idea that I ran across was that faking it doesn't make it. As you all know, I'm privileged to have, in conjunction with Amy and the support of lots of people, we got one of our kids officially to adulthood over the last week. We have an 18-year-old, and it's interesting to see a person walk into adulthood because they're starting to realize, number one, that they don't know what they're doing, and number two, that other people seem to know what they're doing. And so that's an idea that I've highlighted, is that all of the adults are just making it up as they go. Some people describe this as fake it till you make it. Other people just think about putting a good foot forward and figuring it out as you go. Whatever words you put on it, we often feel like we don't know what we're doing and we're just trying to make it up as we go. But that's the case for a lot of us. And in life and figuring out what you want to do with the rest of your life, it's not necessarily a bad thing to put on a happy face and bravely charge forward. But that does not necessarily lead to the types of relationships that we're talking about, the type of community that we want to build. In 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verses 9 through 10, it says this, but he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, Paul says, I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. For when I am weak, then I am strong. And I think about raising teenagers and having such foibles as like food stuck in your teeth and the possible reactions that we can have to that. We can be horrified and ashamed of ourselves and slink off to try to get the whatever's in our teeth out, or we can just own it. We can say, guess I'm eating my vegetables or whatever, and laugh it off, laugh at ourselves and move on. And it's that owning of our foibles, of the times where we're not perfect, that actually leads to the acceptance that we're looking for. People that can handle us because they know we're not perfect. We're not trying to put on a show and be something that we're not. We don't have to fake it. And so one of the ways we can live this out is to start tentatively walking into a situation where we let down our guard with your people. We often talk about having the people in our life that are trusted, the close ones, the people that we trust. With those people, we can let down our guard. We can be who we are, warts and all. We can show them who we are because that binds us together. I'm proud and encouraged by the openness and authenticity this group has shown just this morning, talking about where we are, not just with the people that are saying I'm having a really hard time, but those of us that are also feeling grateful and blessed by where we are in life. That takes vulnerability. And it's that vulnerability, that not faking it, that leads to that binding together, that encouragement among those branches that Mark was talking about. Faking it doesn't make it in close relationships. It doesn't work, but vulnerability does. We can also own our missteps. Not too long ago, like within the last decade, I was privileged to go back to grad school. And being a little bit older as a non-traditional student, I was not ashamed to ask questions in class when I didn't know what the professor was talking about or when I didn't understand something. And it sometimes meant that I looked like I didn't know what I was doing or know what I was talking about, which I didn't. That's exactly where I was. But in owning those misunderstandings or perhaps misreadings of our text for the week, I grew and I learned in knowledge. And it created an environment where really the only stupid question was not asking a question at all, and something that benefits everyone. And so there's a lot to be gained from owning either mistakes that you've made or misunderstandings or things that you've done wrong. In James chapter 5, verse 16, James says, "Therefore, confess your sins to one another." Mark quoted this earlier. "And pray for one another that you may be healed. The prayer of a righteous person has great power as it is working." And what jumps out at me in thinking about this verse in the context of vulnerability is it is a very vulnerable thing to confess when you've done something wrong, to own your missteps. But it's in doing that we are healed, that we are knit together with one another. And that actually is what leads us to be righteous, not that we're pretending to have it all together, but it's in owning our mistakes. It's in confessing, you know what, I screwed up and I own that. That is what leads us to righteousness and to being righteous people. We can do this by creating a culture of mending relationships. In our house, it's easy to talk about who's to blame for a misunderstanding, but we found it particularly helpful to talk about how each of us contributed to a situation. So not talking about who's to blame, but rather saying, you know what, I contributed to this situation in this way, and for that, I apologize. In doing simple things like owning our contribution, owning our own missteps, we can create a healthier overall environment in which relationships can be mended and can thrive. We can own our missteps to make it safe for others to do the same. We can also be free with our affections. Again, reflecting on having teenagers, it seems like the the age of being a teenager, people very much want to conform. They don't want to stand out. They want to be like their peers so that they can be liked by their peers. And it's a very rare thing for people to feel free to be who they are, because there's such a risk of isolation and rejection if you're different from the crowd. And many of us carry that into adulthood. We just want to fit in. We just want to be liked and loved. Even if that means we hide away some parts of ourselves that we might think are less acceptable. In 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verses 11 to 13, here's a not often quoted verse for you. We have spoken freely to you, Corinthians. Our heart is wide open. You are not restricted by us, but you are restricted in your own affections. In return, widen your hearts also. I found this verse compelling for some reason this week, and even more so when I looked at the context. What Paul has said right before this is talking about how he and his companions were free and open with their love and affection in the midst of difficulty. It's not that when things were going well, it was easy to love. It was that even when everything was going wrong, they were facing rejection and beatings and not having enough. In the midst of the storm of their lives, they chose to be open-hearted. And that made a difference for the Corinthians. And Paul here is encouraging them as well, regardless of what's going on, whether life is good for you or not so good for you. In the midst of whatever storm is raging, be open-hearted as well, and then you will be free. And I think that's something that we can take the risk of as well in the midst of everything that's going on, just like you've already done this morning, to take the risk to share your affections. Talk about, if you're excited, talk about things you're excited about. One of the very practical ways that I've chosen to live this out in very minor risks is that if I notice somebody, if I think somebody's gotten a haircut, then I'll say, hey, did you get a haircut? And half the time I'm wrong. They haven't gotten a haircut. They're just whatever, maybe they washed their hair, or they're just having a particularly good hair day. I've chosen to take that risk because regardless of whether I'm right or wrong about them having a haircut, I can say, well, you know what? You're having a great hair day. Your hair's on point today. Carry on. Just being willing to risk sharing what you like about someone or what you appreciate about someone, or if somebody's having a good hair day, whatever it is, if you're free with those affections, it makes their life a little bit brighter. We can risk sharing our affections, and in so doing, be free. We can be free with our affections and brighten everyone's life in the midst of the storm. So these are some ways that I've found we can be vulnerable and bind ourselves together with our fellow branches. We can let down our guard with our people. And eventually, we get the strength, the support to begin letting down our guard with more and more people, to expanding our circle. We can create a culture of mending relationships by owning our contribution and making it safe for others to do the same. And we can take the risk to share our affections. Pretty much everybody's having a difficult time right now for one reason or another. And so sharing our affections is an easier way that we can make everybody's life a little bit more joyful and free. I was reflecting on these ideas, and the image of a clam came to mind. Clam is squishy on the inside and hard on the outside, and it feels like a lot of us right now want to clam up, to just clamp down and to have our hard shells and just weather the storm. But it's in that squishy inside that the pearl is made. And so I think what vulnerability does is it allows us to open up and to share the beauty of our inner selves, of what's really going on in our lives with those around us. It's not that we have to be vulnerable all the time with everyone. That wouldn't necessarily lead to what we're talking about. But when it feels good to do so, maybe just with a few select fellow branches, we can open up our squishy insides and show people the pearl of a genuine relationship. And that's what vulnerability affords. So may we be open with our weaknesses, and in so doing, be free from them. May we acknowledge that we have room to learn and grow. Through our affections, may we brighten the storm. And may we be open to the vulnerability of love.